Well, welcome everyone back to our Painted Porch book club. My name is Sierra and I'm joined by the illustrious Amy Yukowski and the very handsome Rob Hunter over in Arizona. I'm coming to you from Florida. And we've started a new book. Maybe some of you joined us for some or all of the 52 weeks of Stoicism, but we've started a new book that we're talking about today, and it is called The Pen by Dave Oliver. Some of us are reading on paper, some of us are reading digitally. Now, just a little bit of background on this book, and then we're going to jump in. The Pen was written by Dave Oliver, who I'm very lucky to have studied with. He was a yoga instructor, as well as like a generally awesome guy. And he wrote this book before he passed in 2014, and it was published a few years later by several of his students and good friends. You might think, oh, it's written by a yoga teacher, it's about yoga. It's actually not about yoga at all, which is interesting. Dave Oliver, I always said, was such a great storyteller. He was awesome at telling a story, and this is a narrative story. It's not a very long book, so if you want to hop into a book club without having like a huge, clunky book to haul around, this is your book. So let's go. We're starting with the beginning of the book, and I'm going to just ask you to jump in. Like, what are some of your initial thoughts about the story?
I'll say first off, just the way it's structured, I thought has been really interesting. It seems like, now I haven't read the whole thing. I just read through chapter 3.1, but just the way he even structured the chapter, it's like the beginning of the chapter seems like it's a letter to his daughters, and then or someone. And then the second part is a little bit of a look back in time. I don't know if it's to his life. I'm sure that'll all be revealed. His life or someone's life that he knows or he experienced, or simply just a creative representation of the past. So I thought that was really interesting how it kind of buns. At first, it was a little bit jarring. I was like, oh, wait, what's happening here? But once I got through chapter 3, I started to recognize what the pattern was and starting to try to tie a little bit of a theme from the letter to whomever at the beginning, and then the reflection in history. How about you, Rob?
I had a very similar impression, but I mean, obviously I know that David passed because obviously with Sierra's history with him. So I interpreted the very beginning, almost the intros to the chapter, as a person who knows what's coming. Mm-hmm. And he wants people to know about really what he felt and thought about leading up to that, because I imagine that facing death gives you a different perspective, or multiple perspectives. It seems to me that Dave has taken the approach of, okay, this was my time in this realm. I'm going to let you know that maybe it wasn't long enough by traditional standards, but I found meaning in a lot of these really minuscule moments that we often look past, like sitting there and looking at his kids and just staring at their faces and watching them breathe. Mm-hmm. I imagine that a lot of parents do that, but Amy and I are not parents. But I imagine later on in life, you may forget that you had those moments. And that being present in those moments is really super important. And I think that, to me, again, through the first 3 chapters, I haven't skipped ahead because I didn't want to cheat. But it's that reminder for all of us that that's important, because those are the moments that are going to be important when you're facing the end of life. Yes. It doesn't have to be sad all the time either. Like, it's not like meant to be necessarily morbid. It just is.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, and I have read the whole book, but I promise I won't do any spoilers. But what we're starting to already see is the way that the style that's written is that you're looking at a couple different perspectives. You're looking at a couple different perspectives on perhaps some of the same types of things that happened. And, as you can imagine, it's sort of like, think about if you were in one situation as a child and you only saw one side of your parents' relationship, for example, you might have one perception about what it was, or a perception of who a person is. If you only ever see a person in one aspect of their life, you may only have a partial perspective of that person as a whole. So there's a different perspective about what's going on. And there are some dramatic things that happen in this first section. I mean, we get that that the father is a cop, LAPD. We get that maybe there's some infidelity or some lying about something. And we get that there's a night of drinking way too much. The parents were supposed to be on this dance show. They loved to dance. Everybody got super excited. And the dad just got really drunk and then fell and hit his head and, like needed all these stitches and was bleeding. I really thought it was interesting about the cousin who has this special inn at the hospital, like takes him to go get stitched up but like the secret back door of the hospital. And maybe
He's
it's
done it
because
enough. He has special access. He's done it enough, apparently.
And they even say he doesn't measure in stitches anymore. He measures in inches. But it's and then you're thinking, well, why, you get why like a young kid might have that secret access, but maybe this father needed that secret access because he was a cop and he didn't want people knowing about what went on, right? Again, it's that perspective and like that perception of you're trying to keep up a certain what people see and what they don't see.
Which is so interesting, though, that you point that out, because you think about how as individuals, we very much sometimes put on a mask, right? Put on a mask of who we think we're supposed to be or what others expect us to be. And even in that regard, but the interesting thing is that despite maybe them trying to mask some of these flaws, it seems like everybody knew, or maybe we'll find out more, but just the fact that they were going to this dance event, they invited a bunch of people and no one showed up. I thought that was very telling as well. Why didn't anybody else show up? Why did none of their neighbors come? Is it because of something else that either, that they've seen that, Gil and I think Mary is her name, that they think they're doing a really good job of masking, but it's not as good as they think it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other things that happened in this first section is all about the dog. So there's this dog, Boomer, and it's kind of funny. They say like that they're not really sure how Boomer ever became their dog. It just kind of did, but that the dog was definitely Rick's, like that was Rick's dog. And even talks about going and just running this dog ragged, and the dog is getting old, but the dog will not leave his side, will not so there's that relationship with the dog, and this dog is just, a true man's best friend. And then the dog gets old and the father, takes him to be destroyed. And it's very interesting to me. He says, Gil's coming, Gil is the father. Rick is coming home from school and the dog isn't there. He immediately knows something's wrong. And the father says, I hope it won't cause any animosity. But, Boomer had to be destroyed. And it's almost like just nothing even registers. And his father says it again. And then he just says, he just wants this awkward standing on the porch conversation to be over. It's like, it's such an interesting like thing with grief is he might just be feeling all these things about the dog. And yet like, he doesn't want to stand there,
Yeah. Good.
But it is interesting too, like the way that it's written, like destroyed, like who says that?
Yeah.
So, it didn't really dawn on me until you mentioned, Sierra, that it's different perspectives, right? So it may not have actually happened that way. I don't know if that is the author, Dave Oliver's intent, is that in our minds, we have these certain emotional events that have happened to us on our perspective. But if you ask someone else about it, they might be like, I never said destroyed. I said, we sat down on the porch and we had this moment and we talked this way. You remember it as being this tragic emotional moment because you lost your dog. So you're going to naturally remember it a different way than I would maybe as an adult who has a better understanding that dogs don't live forever. If you get 10, 11, 12, 13 years, you're a lucky dog owner.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still sad and still tragic. But for some people as a 6-year-old, whatever. So I remember losing my dog in 3rd grade. So we went to Florida for my aunt's wedding, came back, and my dad didn't go with us, but he had to explain to us that the dog was run over by a car. So in 3rd grade, you're like 8 or 9 years old, and it's like this big tragic thing to lose your dog. And you're like, whoa, weird. So I probably remember it differently than my father does or my mother does.
Mm-hmm. And it
Yeah,
may not even happen when you were on vacation.
May not have.
Possibly.
Well, I mean,
although,
it's memories.
Rob's memory is like a steel trap.
Yeah, but even if my memory is like a steel trap, human memories are not super reliable, no matter how good your memory is, because your brain can compartmentalize things. So it's like, oh, I took this fact and put it over here, and this fact over here, and that forgot about 50 million other facts because it can only process so much information. So it's entirely possible that it happened in 5th grade, or the dog ran away and didn't get hit by a car, and I just remember. Who knows? I mean, it's very intriguing.
But it's true of, I mean, we even talked about this a lot in our last book, is that the same exact thing can happen in a room with 5 people, and those 5 different people all have a different perspective of what went down or how it was or the emotions tied to it. And it's just that different perspective of things. I mean, for all you know, your dad was, agonizing about how he was going to tell you guys. That could have been like the hardest day of his life to tell you guys about the dog. And even though he did the best that he could, it still was really hard for you.
And it's interesting. It made me think of one more thing, final thought on this before we move on, is, we talk a lot about, Rob, you talk about, how to effectively communicate. And so often, and you even mentioned this when it comes to appreciation, Sierra, but so often how we communicate is how we would communicate, right? Like how we would want to receive information versus thinking about how the person that we're actually delivering it to would understand or wants to receive it. I think about Gil and Rick. So, Gil said it a certain way. The dog was destroyed. I hope there's no ambiguity. And even in that, Rick said, or the narrator said, Rick had no idea what that word means. So his dad repeated it looking for a response, but Rick, being a 6 or 7-year-old or however old he was, he had no idea what that word meant. So his dad was looking for some sort of reassurance using that term and didn't get it because he was communicating to him as he would communicate instead of how Rick should, he should have communicated to Rick how Rick needed to hear it, which I think is interesting.
Another thing too, just a side note on that, on communicating, is if something bad happens, we always want to have, as the communicator who's relaying the bad news, some type of perspective that we want that other person to have. Well, think about it this way. Sometimes it's best to just say what needs to be said, say it in the nicest, best way possible, and then sit there with that person while they process. Because I think that, well, it means this, or it could mean this, or, well, maybe they're not at the point where they want a perspective like that yet. So it's just news. I'm going to sit here and be present with you. And then as you have questions or thoughts, I'll be here to listen to them. Because I think we always, as humans, we want to solve other people's problems, especially when they're emotional problems. And number one, it's not real good training when you really think about it, because you're not really processing your own thoughts, feelings, and your interpretations of them, versus someone telling you, oh, the dog was destroyed. Like, wow, destroyed. Interesting. So, there's room for space that I don't think we appreciate enough in situations like that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. That's a good perspective. Another piece that I found really interesting, I guess, as both a human and a mom, is when they sit down to the dinner table, the narrator spends a lot of time talking about the types of dishes or the types of glassware that are on the table. It's plastic, it's the for now, set of dishes. And they talk about how like the mom eventually wants to have nice dishes, but not worry about like things getting, like how her kids knock things over or like things become a mess. And then they even talk very specifically about throwing a cup and like the ice edges are still really sharp. They haven't had enough time to cool down. And it's so interesting to me, this whole idea of these for now dishes. It's like living with this temporary, life, these temporary dishes, that she really doesn't want to use these dishes, but that's what she's like settled on, using these dishes.
Mm. How often do we do that in other areas of our life? Our for now, I think back just something very simple. My parents were always somedayers. Someday we'll do this, someday we'll do that. And, specifically, it was right around 2010, 2011. Someday we want to go to Italy. And I'm like, why not make someday today? So, because it was always sometime in the future. And so sometimes you have to like challenge people a little bit, or at least remove the perceived barriers that they have to being able to make that someday today. Like for them, I said, I actually did some research. I found a company that went to Italy. I was like, here it is. You don't have to think about it. All you have to do is pay for it, and they'll take you where you want to go. And that from there opened up their eyes and their world to more travel and to seeing more places and building up a little bit more travel courage to step outside of what they know or their comfort zone to try something new. So bringing that someday today, I think that's important in a lot of areas of your life. There are times where you do have to legitimately kind of compromise for the time being, if based on finances, lifestyle, whatever it might be. But so often, I think I just read that there's this author, Daniel Pink. Maybe we'll read some of his books at some point during our book club, because he's great. But he has a bunch of different books, but his most recent one is all about regret. It's called The Power of Regret. And he did surveys from, thousands of people about what they regret the most. And one of the biggest regrets was not doing that thing that they wanted to do, not taking that job, or staying in a safe job their whole life and not trying that entrepreneurial idea or that passion of theirs and not pursuing it. So that makes me think, even, something as simple as the for now plates, there's a for now life as a whole that often you can get stuck in.
It's just very interesting. We'll have to see kind of where this leads us as far as this for now idea. But I love that, like, we're starting to kind of get into some of this and kind of think about these characters. It's also very interesting how they keep talking about how his sister is older and this relationship with the sister, but so far we haven't seen a whole lot with the sister, with Rick's life. So we've got a story that kind of jumps around a little bit. There's sort of like two different authors or two different perspectives happening, and it's seemingly sort of random. So we'll have to see how that develops even further into our story. So next week, we are going to be reading from chapter 3.1 to, I believe it's just before chapter 5. Yes, for this through, so 3.1 through 4.1 are the pages that we're going to be covering next week. Yes. So until next time, we will see you on the Porch Book Club. We are again reading The Pen by Dave Oliver. It's not too late to join us if you want to hop in. It's a really quick read, and I think you'll have a lot of fun. Guys, ready to sign off? Anything else I missed that you want to chat about?
No, I think this is a great first pass. I'm looking forward to seeing how it evolves over the rest of this book.
Okay. All right. Well, until next time, see you later.